low to moderate income, or in other words, a low to moderate income percentage of 53%. This Green Thumb facility is located in an industrial park on the edge of the city of Hope, Florida. The industrial park contains 6 parcels in all, 3 additional existing businesses, and 2 of the parcels contain empty spec buildings that will bring the park to full capacity once occupied. There are 375 jobs that are currently held within the industrial park, including Green Thumb Industries, and 195 out of the 375 jobs are held by low to moderate income persons, or in other words, a low to moderate income percentage of 52%. While in the midst of a struggling economy, Green Thumb has been feeling the strains of raising its output while trying to keep manufacturing costs down and remaining competitive in the global marketplace. Green Thumb has seen a decrease in revenues of 50% over the last year, putting the company at risk of closing its doors. Green Thumb is examining several options in order to keep the doors open, including the closure of the second facility that is located in Georgia and moving the jobs to the city of Hope, Florida. To compound the situation, the state of Florida Department of Environmental Protection has determined that the industrial park does not meet the water quality and wastewater discharge standards. Florida Department of Environmental Protection has notified the City of Hope and each of the businesses within the park that either the water and sewer services need to be upgraded to be in compliance with the environmental standards, or they will be assessed an environmental impact fine and closure if mitigation steps are not taken. The businesses have met with the City of Hope and expressed their concerns over paying the fines and the closure of the industrial park. The City of Hope will need to do something if it is going to retain all of the jobs within the park. I'll now turn the presentation back over to Diane, who will address eligibility, national objectives, and public benefit standards.
Thank you, James. I will further describe the scenario that James just set up for us and discuss what Green Thumb will attempt to do to assist with its precarious financial situation. Before we get started, though, I want to alert you to the fact that this particular scenario will focus on the state CDBG program. There are several differences that entitlement grantees need to keep in mind, particularly regarding the calculations for public benefit standards. As we discussed previously, the Guide to Eligible Activities for both entitlement communities and states is a great resource for grantees and contains several examples in the area of public benefit standards. So Green Thumb Industries has discussed the situation with the City of Hope, and they have decided that applying for 2 grants will help them address their financial situation. In order to avoid layoffs or closure and keep the business in its current location, the City of Hope will apply for a 2-tier grant from the state of Florida. The 2 grants are: 1, new equipment to make Green Thumb more efficient and competitive in the global marketplace for $2.5 million, and 2, a grant for water and sewer improvements that will serve all 6 parcels, 2 of which are vacant, providing all the businesses with improved service and addressing environmental compliance issues for $4.5 million. So, as we look over this scenario, what would be the eligible activities? Remember, each activity funded by CDBG must be eligible and meet a national objective. Funding the new equipment to assist Green Thumb would be eligible under Section 105A17 of the Act. As you may recall from prior webinars, this section of the Act is the provision of assistance to a private for-profit entities when the assistance is appropriate to carry out an economic development project that creates or retains jobs among a list of other activities. For the water and sewer upgrades, these are eligible under Section 105A2 of the Act, which covers improvements of public works and facilities and site improvements. So that's eligibility, at least part of it. National objectives. Of the 3 national objectives, these activities clearly meet the job retention, low and moderate income national objective. The City of Hope must document that the jobs would be lost without CDBG assistance and that either or both of the conditions apply with respect to 51% of the jobs at the time CDBG assistance is provided. 1, the job is known to be held by a low and moderate income person, or 2, the job can reasonably be expected to turn over in the following 2 years, and that it will be filled by or steps will be taken to ensure that it is made available to a low and moderate income person upon turnover. In the case of Green Thumb, of the 75 employees on board, 40 are documented as low and moderate income, or 53%. And Steve Roadside will talk more about documentation in a future slide. Keep in mind, for activities pursuant to 105A2 undertaken for economic development purposes, for the purpose of one or more businesses, serving one or more businesses, the low and moderate income calculations may be met by aggregating jobs created and retained by all businesses in the business park. You may be wondering why we say may. The differentiation of may or must depends on the cost per job, which we will cover in a moment. For now, recall that we stated there are 375 jobs total in the business park, and the overall low and moderate income percentage is 52%. So we seem to be okay for now. So let's pause for a moment and acknowledge that the activities appear to be eligible and meet a national objective. Are we done? No, we are not done. We must now move on to the calculation of public benefit standards. What are these anyway, and why are they so confusing? First of all, recall that public benefit standards are an eligibility consideration. These standards were designed to ensure that the amount of public benefit is appropriate given the level of CDBG investment. A key thing to note about these calculations is that it caps the level of CDBG investment in the project. It does not cap any non-CDBG funds that may be in the project. This cap is based on FTEs that are created, not just jobs for low and moderate income persons. So let's review what we learned previously. Public benefit standards are only triggered for certain economic development activities pursuant to certain sections of the statute, 105A14, 105A15, and 105A17. They are also triggered for infrastructure projects undertaken in order to create or retain jobs where more than $10,000 per job of CDBG assistance is provided. So let's look at our scenario again. A grant to a business, to Green Thumb, for $2.5 million. A grant to a business of Green Thumb for $2.5 million pursuant to 105A17 of the Act, definitely covered by public benefit standards. A grant for water and sewer improvements for economic development purposes that will serve more than one business for $4.5 million under Section 105A2 of the Act, definitely covered by public benefit standards. So let's now demonstrate how the public benefit standard is calculated for the individual standard. Recall that the limit is $50,000 of CDBG per job created. For the grant to Green Thumb for the new equipment, you will see the calculation on the screen. The grant of $2.5 million to be obligated to retain 75 jobs, or $33,333 per job. This clearly meets the individual activity standard of $50,000 of CDBG funds per job. For the second grant, $4.5 million to be obligated to retain 375 jobs. The amount per job is $12,000, which meets the individual activity standard of $50,000 of CDBG funds per job. So you may now be wondering where the 375 jobs came from and why we're not using the 75 jobs in the calculation. We know that activities eligible pursuant to 105A2 of the statute are subject to public benefit standards, but these types of infrastructure activities that will benefit more than one business are treated a little differently. We may or must, as I mentioned earlier, use all the jobs created or retained in the service area, in this case, the business park. May or must depends on the cost per job. If we take the $4.5 million and divide by 75 jobs, the cost per job is $60,000, which means the activity fails the public benefit standards and cannot be undertaken as is. Dividing the $4.5 million by 375 gives us $12,000 per job, which means that the jobs must be aggregated, and for national objective compliance, the grantee must also continue keeping track of any additional jobs created for 1 year after the water and sewer improvements are completed to make sure that the overall low mod percentages exceed 51%. So we did receive a lot of questions about the individual standard and the aggregate standard, and you're probably now wondering where the $35,000 per job comes in. Recall that this is the aggregate standard for all jobs created in the program, all jobs created in the program against the activities funded for economic development. This is another example where the calculations for the state CDBG program differ from those for the entitlement program. So as a quick example to demonstrate this concept, if we assume that the state of Florida distributes $40 million for economic development projects in 2010 and plans to create or retain a total of 1,500 jobs, the state's program would meet the aggregate public benefit standard because $26,667 is less than $35,000. So that's a quick and easy example to demonstrate the aggregate public benefit standard. In Appendix A of the CDBG regulations, HUD provides the voluntary underwriting guidelines that provide suggestions for the types of criteria that a state or a unit of general local government, and also entitlement community, may use when evaluating proposed economic development activities. Unlike the public benefit standards that are mandatory, these guidelines are voluntary, and HUD does not require that grantees use these guidelines. However, we do require that if the grantees are not going to use these guidelines, that they conduct a basic financial underwriting prior to the provision of CDBG financial assistance to the for-profit business. The guidelines are listed on the slide, and I encourage grantees to review these and the procedures of the state, the unit of general local government, the entitlement community should do the same. Now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Steve Roadside, the Acting Director of the State and Small Cities Division, who will cover documentation, restriction on employer relocation, and other compliance issues. Steve?
Thank you, Diane, and welcome to a gray day in Washington. You may be wondering what documentation the City of Hope is required to meet the national objectives of retaining low and moderate income jobs. The City of Hope is retaining 75 jobs at the Hope facility. In order for the jobs to be considered retained, the unit of general local government must document that the job will be actually lost without CDBG assistance. In order to document this, the company must have issued a notice to the affected workers that they're going to lose their jobs unless the funding comes through, or they must have made a public announcement that the plant is going to close, or they must provide financial records showing that the business is going to have to cut back employment, in this case close the facility, if they do not receive financial assistance. Stating that closing the facility is an option under consideration is not enough. Generally, retained jobs are supported by a public announcement or a notice to the employees. Next, we'll go over what is considered to be a job. A job must be a permanent position. Jobs are counted as FTEs, so that 2 20-hour-a-week jobs would equal 1 full-time equivalent position. Non-12-month jobs are only counted if they're designed to provide employees yearly income. Therefore, a teacher who works 9 months a year would qualify as a permanent job, assuming that they get a living wage, and a lifeguard would not. Other less than 12-month jobs would be looked at on a case-by-case basis. The unit of general local government must keep records showing the family income for the 75 employees whose jobs are being retained. Remember, it is not what the retained job pays, it's the family income for each of the 75 employees that's being measured. Since more than 51% of the retained jobs are low and moderate income, the unit of general local government does not have to document the family income of new employees that are hired by Green Thumb as a result of job turnover. We've just discussed documentation. So does the state or the unit of general local government make the required economic development determinations and keep appropriate records? As a reminder, this scenario is state CDBG specific. There's different answers for the entitlement program. Like many issues in the CDBG program, the answer is it depends. The regulations clearly state that the unit of general local government is required to document those jobs that would be lost without CDBG assistance. Otherwise, both the state and the unit of general local government are required to have documentation per 570.490 of the regs to facilitate HUD's review and audits. The unit of general local government is also required to keep records to facilitate state review and audits. In reality, the unit of general local government has primary record-keeping responsibility. If the state provides funding to the unit of general local government for economic development, then the unit of general local government gets to pick the projects under the funded grant. If the state has a first-come, first-served application window for economic development projects, it will therefore review all of the details of each economic development project before it is funded, and therefore make the determinations that the projects are eligible, meet a national objective, and comply with public benefit standards and other requirements. Even though Green Thumb has moved forward with its two-tiered CDBG grant, they're still considering the closure and relocation of the second plant that's located in Georgia. If they were able to receive CDBG monies to move this plant to one of the two vacant spec buildings, Green Thumb would be able to move 50 more jobs into the area, consolidate its operation, and pick up some additional warehouse space. This would only be possible if they receive CDBG assistance, so they're left with the question as to whether or not this would be possible. In determining whether Green Thumb can relocate its plant to the industrial park, they will need to consider if the project triggers the restriction on job relocation. Job relocation is covered in Section 105H of the Act, 570.482 of the state regs, and 570.210 of the entitlement regs. CDBG funds may not be used to directly assist a business, including a business expansion, in the relocation of a plant, facility, or operation from one labor market area, LMA, to another labor market area, if the relocation is likely to result in a significant loss of jobs in the LMA from which the relocation occurs. Let's see what this really means in English. Directly assist means providing assistance to the business under any of the eligible activities listed on the slide. You can refer to these later, but generally these sections of the Act relate to acquisition, rehabilitation, assistance to a for-profit business, and other activities. Labor market area is defined by the Bureau of Labor Statistics as an area where residents can reasonably find employment within a reasonable distance. For non-metro areas, the LMA is either defined by BLS, where the state can combine LMAs that are determined by BLS. States are required to define LMAs on an annual basis if they're not using the Bureau of Labor Statistics LMAs. The state that is losing the jobs gets to define its LMAs, not the state that's receiving the jobs. LMAs can be very large. For example, the Chicago LMA includes counties in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana. The last item is significant loss of jobs, which is one of the important considerations I'll cover next. The loss of less than 26 jobs is not a significant loss of jobs. The loss of more than 499 jobs is a significant loss of jobs. From 26 to 499 jobs, the loss is significant if the job loss is more than 0.1% of the total number of persons in the labor force in the LMA. This information is available online from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. A job is considered lost if it's relocated within 3 years of the time the CDBG assistance is provided to a business, or a longer time specified in a written agreement between the business, the unit of general local government, and the state if applicable. In the current example, Green Thumb would be moving 50 jobs from Georgia to Hope, Florida. If the number of jobs in the labor force of the losing LMA was more than 50,000, it would be an insignificant loss of jobs. This is because 50 is 0.1% of 50,000. Otherwise, it would be significant, and the assistance would not be permitted under CDBG. This assumes that Hope, Florida, and Newtown, Georgia are not in the same LMA, which I imagine would be the Jacksonville LMA. I will now turn this over to James Heyman, who will discuss job turnover issues. And while James is getting settled, this might be a good time to put any questions if you have any. Thank you.
say that after a year of completing its CDBG grants, Green Thumb has experienced the loss of several key employees that held positions that required special training. More importantly, the loss of these employees has caused the full-time equivalent positions held by the low to moderate income persons to drop below 51%. Green Thumb qualified for its job retention grant of upgraded equipment by having more than 51% of its employees documented as low to moderate income persons. What must Green Thumb do in conjunction with the City of Hope to fill these positions? Green Thumb met the national objective requirements of the first part of the two-tier grant, a $2.5 million new equipment grant, by retaining 75 jobs, of which 53% were held by low to moderate income persons. At this point, Green Thumb is retaining jobs, and documentation for compliance was based on those who currently held the 75 positions, and not when the positions turn over. Job creation and retention are covered in 570-483B4 of the state regulations and 570-208A4 of the entitlement regulations. For job retention, Green Thumb had to demonstrate that the jobs would be lost without CDBG assistance, and that either or both of the following conditions needed to be present. Of the retained jobs, 51% must be currently held by low to moderate income persons, or that a job can reasonably be expected to turn over in 2 years, and there is documentation that it would be filled by a low to moderate income person. In addition, the unit of general local government must document the steps it will take in order to ensure that the jobs will be made available to low to moderate income persons in the event that the jobs will turn over within 2 years. Jobs are considered to be made available if the following occurs. The business agrees that special skills or prerequisites are not a requirement for the job, or they hire unqualified persons and provide the training. The unit of general local government and business take actions to ensure that low to moderate income persons will receive first consideration for the jobs. I'll turn it back over to Steve about some further developments in our Green Thumb scenario.
Thank you, James. A couple years after the $4.5 million CDBG-assisted water and sewer grant was completed, the businesses of the City of Hope's Industrial Park enjoyed stability and, in some cases, moderate growth. Large business decided to move into the 2 open spec buildings in the Industrial Park, so they have signed leases and are ready to move in as soon as they can finalize all the paperwork. Once occupied by the new business, the City of Hope's Industrial Park will contain a total of 425 jobs, which includes the 50 new jobs created and the 375 existing jobs held by the existing businesses. Since the water and sewer project was a CDBG-funded project and the occupation of the spec buildings will bring the industrial park to full capacity, what must the City of Hope take into account? The new jobs would not be counted under 57483B4 little vi big F number 2, and that's an awful break site. We shouldn't have things that long, as they were created more than 1 year after the physical completion of the public facility. This is different from jobs that are created by a direct assistance to business, which are counted until the job creation stops. What would happen if the City of Hope's Industrial Park did not meet a national objective for public benefit standards when it reaches full capacity and was not creating any more jobs? For 57482F6, the state and its grant recipients must retain sufficient records to demonstrate the level of public benefit that's actually achieved upon completion of the CDBG-assisted economic development activity, and how that compares to the level of such benefit anticipated when the CDBG assistance was obligated. If the state grant recipient's actual results show a pattern of substantial variation from the anticipated results, the state and its recipient are expected to take those actions reasonably within a respective control to improve the accuracy of their projections. If the actual results demonstrate that the state has failed the public benefit standards, HUD may require the state to meet more stringent standards in future years as appropriate. During monitoring visits, the HUD field office would make a finding if the public benefit standards were not met, and would expect the state to make a similar finding when it monitors its recipients. If the national objective was not met, the first thing the state should do is see if the project met an alternate national objective, for example, slums and blight. If this was not the case, the state should make a finding and take appropriate corrective action. Likewise, the field office would make a finding if the national objective was not met and take corrective action as outlined in 574.95 of the regulations. I'll now turn the webinar over to Steve Johnson, the Director of the Entitlement Division. And while Steve is setting up, this would be a good time once again to ask questions if you have them.
Thank you, Steve. Welcome, everyone. We're glad you're tuned in. I'm going to speak about commercial rehabilitation and microenterprise as two specific kinds of eligible activities or categories of eligible activities because we did get a lot of questions from those of you who watched our first webinars. And I want to point out that while the regulation citations and the discussions I'm making are, given my job, focused on the entitlement program, virtually everything that I have to say here today is equally applicable to the state CDBG program as well. Now, in talking about commercial rehabilitation, I think it's helpful to frame the discussion in terms of certain questions. What kinds of buildings are we talking about here? What kind of entity owns the building? What kinds of physical improvements are you talking about doing on the building? Who are going to be the occupants? Is it vacant or is it already occupied? Are you assisting the business owner, the storefront itself, or are you assisting the owner of the building? And at the local level, exactly what sort of benefits are you trying to achieve out of this program? Now, I'm going to use a couple of examples as illustrations later on here in terms of the kinds of commercial buildings we could be talking about here for rehabilitation. You have your basic 1960s era strip commercial shopping center. You have a freestanding commercial building. You could be talking about a big box retail center. You could have an industrial building. Now, I'll circle back and talk a little bit about those later on here. Let's talk about the first aspect of this, which is why it makes a difference as to who owns the building, more specifically, what kind of entity owns the building. If the building is owned by a private for-profit business, then you're slightly more limited in the kinds of physical improvements that can qualify as commercial rehabilitation. You're limited to improvements to the exterior of the building. Now, let me make clear here, because we got some questions on this. The regulations do not say that commercial and industrial rehabilitation is limited to facade improvements. It can be anything that's on the exterior of the building. It can be the roof. It could be the alley side of the building. You can do correction of code violations, and code violations, of course, are defined by local codes. You can do removal of lead, paint, and asbestos, and it's also worth noting that if the building qualifies as historic property, you can also do historic preservation, which is defined as separate from commercial rehabilitation. But keep in mind that historic preservation work are those things that are specifically related to maintaining the historic character of the building. Anything that doesn't fit into one of those categories that's being done on a privately owned business, privately owned building by a for-profit business, you will not be able to call it commercial rehabilitation. You're going to have to make that eligible as economic development assistance to a private for-profit business. However, on the other half of the screen here, you can see if the building is owned by a nonprofit organization or by a public agency, even if it's being used for private commercial purposes, you're a little more free in terms of what you can do. You're not limited to just exterior work, code violations, or historic preservation. Basically, anything that's eligible under 570.202 of the CDBG entitlement regulations is going to be allowable as commercial rehabilitation, and that can include things like architectural barrier removal or interior tenant finishes. Now, the next question has to do with what national objective you're going to try and meet with this program, and that sort of depends on what you're trying to do at the local level, why you're undertaking this program. Are you trying to create jobs? Are you doing this as some sort of Main Street or blight removal program where you're focusing mostly on the physical appearance of the buildings? Is it your goal to provide better retail environment, a greater variety of goods and services to the residents of a neighborhood? Are you undertaking this specifically to support a neighborhood revitalization strategy area, a community development financial institution? Is it an empowerment zone or enterprise community? By the way, Hugh Allen will be talking about neighborhood revitalization strategies during the third half of our show, so stay tuned for that. But I am going to focus mostly on the Slum and Blight National Objective and the notion of meeting the area benefit national objective on the basis of providing goods and services to area residents. I do want to point out, though, that because of using empowerment zones or neighborhood revitalization strategy areas, there's actually a way that you can demonstrate that an economic development job creation program is also meeting the area benefit test. I am not going to talk about that here today. You can certainly look that up in our regulations. I mostly want to focus on providing goods and services in a neighborhood area. But as you can see here, there are several categories in which you could do that. And by the way, these provisions, these flexibilities are not limited to just commercial and industrial rehabilitation. It could apply to any economic development activity. Okay, let's move back to what I really want to talk about here, which is how do you show that you're meeting the low-mod area benefit national objective by providing goods and services to residents of a residential neighborhood? Well, firstly, it has to be a primarily residential neighborhood. You have to be able to show, under the regulation language, that the benefits are available to all the residents of the area. What that means is the goods and services that are being provided by those retail establishments. That sort of leads to the question of, well, what is a basic retail good and service? There is no list. You're not going to find that in the regulation. This is a matter of basically common sense and making your own decisions at the local level. It's like the Supreme Court Justice's definition of pornography, if you will pardon my analogy there. It's in a way you know it when you see it. Now, you have to keep in mind, too, that different kinds of businesses have different service areas. Not every business serves just the exact same area or trade area. And again, this is not limited to commercial and industrial rehabilitation that we're talking about. This concept of what's the service area of a retail goods and services applies to any economic development program. I also want to point out this is not going to work for industrial projects or for businesses that provide assistance and services to other businesses, because they are not providing the services directly to area residents. They're assisting other businesses. So this is sort of the crux, I think, of the entire discussion about showing that you are benefiting residents of a low and moderate income area. What is the area? What is the service area? You need to think about the retail trade area of the businesses that are involved. It's going to depend in part on what kind of building you're talking about and who it is you're actually assisting. Are you providing the assistance to an owner of one building that has a couple of storefronts in it? Is this an office environment, as opposed to commercial retail? Are you providing assistance to a strip shopping mall or to a big box center? Are there existing tenants, or is the building vacant? That may affect who occupies the building. The size of the building, the size of the space may affect what kind of tenants you're going to get in that building. The other point that I think is worth throwing in here is that, keep in mind, when you're providing economic development assistance, be it as commercial rehabilitation or in most other categories in our regulations, each provision of assistance, be it loan, grant, whatever, to an owner or a business is considered to be its own separate activity. And thus, each business that you're assisting or each building has to meet the national objectives on its own. You can't roll together all of the buildings, all of the businesses you assisted in your entire commercial rehab program and show that they all together cumulatively meet the national objective. Each building or each business has to stand on its own. If you make facade improvement loans to 5 individual businesses in 5 different buildings, then each one of those has to meet a national objective on its own. But if you're making a facade improvement loan to improve an entire shopping center, then you're probably assisting the owner of the shopping center, not the individual tenants. And it's the shopping center as a whole that really meets the national objective. What is the service area of a business? There is no one-size-fits-all answer. Again, here's another factor that you have to consider. The location of the building or the business. Just being inside of a census tract that's 51% low and moderate income is not good enough. The business has to be providing goods and services to the residents of the area. There's another reason you can't do industrial buildings under this criteria, because they're probably not in a residential area to begin with. You also have to think about the location, not just in terms of the census tract, but in terms of what's the retail market area of this general location or neighborhood. Is it the downtown central business district? Well, if that's the case, let's say you've got some sort of a restaurant or a necessities store downtown. Is that providing assistance and services only to the people who work downtown during the day and then go home? Or is it providing essential retail services to the residents who live downtown? Or what if you're one of those lucky cities that still has a thriving downtown department store? Well, probably that downtown department store serves more than just the daytime employees and the residents who live downtown. It may serve the entire downtown, the entire city, or even the entire regional area. There's nothing wrong with assisting a business that has a citywide retail trade area. Providing your entire city qualifies as being 51% low and moderate income. If you're only providing assistance to a business that really only serves the daytime residents, well, then you've got to kind of figure out where do all the residents, where all the employees come from. Maybe that's the entire city, maybe it's even bigger, maybe it's the entire region. If you're providing assistance to a business that's downtown that perhaps has a regional trade area, your entire metropolitan area, well, you may have a problem there, because with apologies to Garrison and Keeler, an entire metropolitan area cannot be below the median income. Now, there is no set test or percentages to determine what is a primarily residential area. That's another question that people asked us. You have to have a defensible justification for your determination. I've told people before, this is not a definition that we're going to focus heavily on, but I will say if you had an almost entirely rural county where, you had a few thousand people living in the county seat and the rest of it is farmland, and you're providing assistance to a business that serves, that entire county and maybe then some, somebody might look at you and say, how do you define the entire county as being residential when, out of the 8,000 square miles, 7,900 of it is farmland? So you've got to think about that. You have to have a defensible justification for what is your residential area. Now, what is the service area of the business probably depends more than anything on the business itself. Let me disavow anybody of this belief here. You cannot just draw an arbitrary circle around any given business or every business and say that's the service area. You can't just say, oh, it's a mile diameter. That may be true for some businesses, but there are a lot of businesses where that is simply not true. For example, it depends on the kind of business. Where are there other businesses? A grocery store has a different retail trade area where they draw customers from than does, say, a branch bank or a dry cleaners or a hair salon. Different sized grocery stores have different service areas. The neighborhood food mart is going to have a much smaller service area than one of these mega food warehouses out at the freeway interchange. And it also depends on the nature of the goods and services provided. Think about jewelry stores. Sort of entry-level jewelry stores like Zales or Kay Jewelers, they have a different demographic than does Tiffany's. Tiffany's is going to have a much bigger service area because they don't have one in every shopping mall. They maybe have one per metro area, and they're obviously aiming at a higher demographic. They are not necessarily providing goods and services to low and moderate income residents. You've got to have some money to buy anything at Tiffany's if you've ever been in there. You also have to think about, is this the only business of this sort in the city or the metropolitan area? A real-life example from my past is I once reviewed a project where they did commercial rehabilitation on a building that was occupied by an Army surplus store. Okay, I don't question that that provides some goods and services to neighborhood residents, except this was the only Army surplus and camping goods store in the entire metropolitan area. And I had to say, if it's the only one of its kind where you can go and buy those sorts of items, then you've got to say that the entire metropolitan area is the service area. You can't just say it's the people that live within 1 mile of the store location. Again, there's no pre-approved list of what constitutes businesses that provide goods and services to area residents of a low and moderate income neighborhood. It's essentially a rebuttable presumption. It's up to you to be able to demonstrate to HUD's satisfaction that the kinds of businesses and the nature of the goods are such that residents of a low-income area are likely to patronize that store, and that the service area that that store draws from is an area that qualifies as 51% low and moderate income, or if you're an exception community, whatever your exception is. Any business or property manager that knows what they're doing has market studies, demographic studies, etc., to know what their service area is and what the demographic is that they're aiming at. You may not know those things yourself. It's not necessarily important that you as the grantee have to know all of those. You can go online to research this stuff. And there is no list of, shall we say, prohibited businesses. You get to decide. Sometimes cities say, we really don't want to assist certain kinds of businesses. We had somebody ask about doing a commercial rehabilitation on a shopping center, and they were hesitant to do it because there was a liquor store there. Well, there's nothing that says you can't from our end. You may not want to, but that's your decision. I will point out, though, if you're talking about your CDBG Recovery Act dollars, remember the Recovery Act did provide certain kinds of recreational and entertainment facilities that were explicitly prohibited, like casinos and other entertainment facilities. So it becomes partly a matter of what do you want to assist, and are you willing to defend that? Now, let's go back to our examples of a couple of kinds of commercial buildings. First, we'll go back to our strip shopping mall. By the way, one of the people who's our trainer noted that if you'll notice, one of the businesses here on the signboard kind of gives new meaning to the concept of a strip mall. So, think about this. First, let's assume that this is a shopping center that is in and principally serves a primarily low and moderate income residential area. Do you see anything here based on the businesses that would lead you to question whether these businesses provide goods and services principally to neighborhood residents of this low and moderate income area? We've got, a pet store, a hair salon, a lock and safe store. MP Island, I happen to know, is a bar and nightclub. Martial arts studio, an insurance company, the jewelry store, a vacuum cleaner store. Cash Express, I'm guessing, is one of those like check cashing or title loan places. I look at that. I don't see personally anything that really jumps out at me, but you're going to have to do some research here, figure out, talk to the shopping center managers, find out, what's their service area, where are the locations of other shopping centers that have a comparable mix of comparable stores. Talk to them about what they view as their trade area. Even they may want to get documentation from the individual businesses. So you've got to do your due research to confirm whether or not this would qualify. Now, let's go to our freestanding commercial building. By the way, somewhere when I looked at this picture, I found something that said maybe there's a pediment that says the building's from 1894. So you might even be able to do this as historic preservation work if all you're wanting to do is the exterior work. If you're wanting to do interior work, well, maybe you've got to do that as assistance to a for-profit business. So what kind of work needs to be done on this building matters. Are you talking about doing the second floor as well? What's going to be occupying the second floor? Is it going to be office space? Is it going to be residential? If it's going to meet a different national objective, then you have to essentially split the building into two for purposes of documenting your national objective. Maybe the second floor is going to be residential that meets low and moderate income housing national objective criteria, and the first floor is going to be providing goods and services to area residents. And note that this is a vacant building. Morse Hardware Company is long since out of business. So the business owner, or the owner of the building, I'm sorry, is going to want to rent to whomever they want to. What are you going to do to ensure that they are renting to a business that will meet a national objective, such as providing goods and services to area residents? Or are they going to be able to document that there are jobs created instead? You're going to have something in your agreements, and frankly, you should have something in your program design that gives you as much latitude as possible. You may want to not write your program design to say, all of our businesses must provide goods and services to area residents, because in this case, you may not know up front. You may not be able to control up front exactly who ends up moving in here. Maybe you need to be able to show that it'll meet the SLUM and BLIGHT national objective, or job creation, or goods and services to area residents. Give yourself that flexibility. So, what happens if the building owner wants to rent this out to an appliance parts store? That probably has a bigger service area, and that's not necessarily only catering to individual residents. Or what if it's a restaurant supply business that wants to move in here? Well, that may be okay if that business is creating jobs. I would say it's probably not necessarily providing services and goods to neighborhood residents directly. Now, I want to talk just a little bit about how this plays out in the state CDBG program. Here we have some similar scale retail buildings. This happens to be Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. Population of about 7,000. The entire county is a population of 28,000. From what I can tell, these businesses are on the downtown Main Street. At the very least, I think you'd have to say that the service area, the retail trade area of downtown Detroit Lakes, Minnesota is at least the entire city, if not all of Becker County. And that would be a problem because neither the city of Detroit Lakes nor Becker County, Minnesota are over 51% low and moderate income. So you're not going to be able to do the national objective of goods and services to area residents. Now, there are other cities that are, and that would work. You've got to be careful of that. Let's look at our big box building. What's going to go into this space? Are you going to get another big box chain? Are you going to split the space into a whole series of small stores, kind of an interior mall? Are you going to get one of those, antique malls? Is the Salvation Army or Goodwill kind of operation going to move in there? Is this going to become a car dealership? That's going to affect whether or not you're providing goods or services to residents of the area and what the service area is. You also have to look at, can you really claim that a business taking up this size space only serves the immediate neighborhood? Given just the way the building looks, I'm not sure if you could claim that this building has code violations or health and safety issues or is blighted, even if you think that having cracks in the parking lot constitutes a code violation. You may or may not be able to fund this unless you can show job creation. On the other hand, if you get a new chain in that's doing something that you don't have before, then you probably are creating jobs. And generally, people taking retail jobs are probably most likely to be low and moderate income. That's a truism, I know. Lastly, industrial buildings. This is, I think, in Chicago. Unless you're converting this building to a retail use, you probably can't do this as area benefit. You might be able to do it as a slum and blight removal project. You might be able to show that the new tenant is creating jobs, or maybe you're going to convert it to a retail use. But what this helps drive home is that there are certain kinds of buildings and businesses you just may not be able to assist whatsoever because you can't show how it's eligible. It may not be eligible as commercial rehabilitation, and it may not meet a national objective. Now, I want to talk about slum and blight removal here. There are 3 categories on how to meet the slum and blight national objective criteria. I am not going to talk about the urban renewal completion one because it affects only a small number of grantees nationally. But I want to talk about the main 2, which are doing activities in a designated or defined blighted area. A defined area has to meet a state or local definition of blighted, deteriorated, etc. You don't actually have to have the official city council resolution declaring it a blighted area. It just has to meet the definition. In addition, the HUD regulations in both the state and the entitlement programs list other criteria that must be met. 25% of the properties have to meet one of a list of criteria that we consider to be blighting influences. They're vacant. They have environmental contamination. The building is dilapidated, etc. You can see the regulations for that whole list. The activity you're undertaking has to address the conditions which contributed to the deterioration of the area. It doesn't have to be one of the things that was named in your designation or your local definition, but you have to show a nexus on why the conditions helped contribute to the blight of the area. If you do this as a slum and blight activity, who cares what businesses occupy the building, at least in terms of national objectives compliance? It doesn't matter, because what you're doing is you are physically improving the building to eliminate blight. If you are doing this on a spot basis, what that means is you're dealing with individual buildings that have blight or decay problems that are not in a defined or designated blighted area. They're the sore thumb that sticks out in an otherwise okay neighborhood. However, rehabilitation of any sort of building, residential or commercial, is limited to eliminating specific conditions that are detrimental to health and safety. That is not necessarily the same thing as just the building has code violations. It's really got to be something that's a health and safety threat. That's going to be somewhat limiting on the amount of commercial rehabilitation work you can do. Lastly, what other things apply to commercial rehabilitation? What other applicable laws? The public benefit standards that James and Steve and Diane talked about do not apply if you're funding this is commercial rehabilitation under 570.202. Labor standards may apply if the construction is over $2,000. That you would have some level of environmental review that you probably have to do, even if you determine that the building has to have no further environmental review. You may still have to do floodplain and historic preservation, Section 106 reviews. The anti-pirating prohibition against relocating jobs does not apply to commercial rehabilitation on its own. Section 3 requirements may apply depending on whether your grant size and the amount of the project dollars trigger the Section 3 thresholds. Let me spend a few minutes now talking about microenterprise assistance, because we also got a number of questions about this. Again, I think it's helpful to frame our discussion in terms of a couple of key questions. How is microenterprise eligible? Who can do it? What is a microenterprise? What kinds of assistance can you provide? What does the business need, for that matter? And how are you going to meet a national objective? Now, the easy part is, how is it eligible? Or who can carry it out, I'm sorry. The grantee, some other public or nonprofit organization, even for-profit entities can undertake microenterprise assistance under the regulations. What is a microenterprise? It's a business that has 5 or fewer employees, including the owner. That's a different definition than some other federal programs use. It's pretty liberal, to tell you the truth, and that's helpful for you. It does not have to be a business that is a full-time standalone business. You could provide assistance to somebody who has, say, a startup, or somebody who's got a part-time or hobby business that they want to expand and grow it into a full-time business. You can even assist people who are interested and show plans to start a microenterprise. Now, it's possible that where you want to take that kind of a category of assistance is providing initial how to become a small business owner training to people. And frankly, if they choose not to start a microenterprise in the end, that's okay. They expressed interest in starting a microenterprise, they qualified, and frankly, it could be a good decision all the way around if they realize that they are not cut out to be a small business owner, capitalist, or maybe their business idea really just isn't saleable and doesn't have a viable future. Now, the kinds of microenterprise assistance you can fund is very broad. The regulations do not limit you to these. You can do financial assistance to the business, loans, grants, etc. You can provide technical assistance or business support services like helping them with a business plan, or providing marketing, or providing payroll support. You can provide things that we think of as sort of the classic microenterprise peer support programs. You can provide transportation for the employee get to the business, or for their employees, or child care for somebody starting up a business. What matters more here probably is, what does the business actually need to help them? We don't have restrictions on the forms of financial assistance that can be provided or what the business uses the money for. So if they want to get money to buy capital equipment, or you want to buy advertising time for them on, say, the cable access channel, if you want to pay to have a consultant to do a business development plan for them, or a marketing plan, all of those would be fine. You could help pay small business bonding. You could help by providing them shared payroll or accounting services. Those would all be totally eligible uses. Sometimes what matters, though, is what the business needs versus what they want, and what's possible versus what's good for the business. You know, a business may want to buy a brand new building as their first thing. Well, probably that's not a capital expense that the business really needs to. They don't need a brand new building. The owner does not necessarily need to lease a Mercedes-Benz as their company car. They do not necessarily need to buy advertising space during the World Series or the Super Bowl. They may have unrealistic expectations, and you're not doing anybody a favor if that's what you provide. I'll put this in my own uniquely indelicate way here. If you don't yourself know how the needs of microenterprises differ from those of other small and medium-sized businesses, then you yourself probably should not be running the microenterprise program. Do everyone a favor and contract out with the people that do know these things. Now, meeting a national objective with microenterprise. It's the same national objective criteria that you know and love for all your other activities. I talked about, like area benefit for goods and services to area residents. We talked about that already under commercial rehab. James has already talked about job creation. I talked a little bit about SLUM and BLIGHT. Nothing different here when it comes to microenterprise, at least on this slide. But on the next slide is what really matters and is a unique flexibility just for microenterprise assistance programs. You can qualify some or all of the owners under the limited clientele national objective criteria, which is that because the owner of the business qualifies as low and moderate income based on their family income. Now, you can only use this if you have a program that is designed exclusively to serve microenterprises. You can't do this if you've got some bigger small business loan program that occasionally serves a microenterprise. It's got to be exclusively for microenterprises. You can take all of the microenterprises you assisted, figure out which ones are owned by people that are low and moderate income. You can cherry pick those out and say, those 9 businesses qualified under the limited clientele national objective, and you're done with them. You can also continue to provide assistance for up to 3 years, because we will presume that they stay low and moderate income for at least 3 years. And it also isn't going to matter what kind of business activity they're engaged in. It could be a high-tech startup business. It could be a business-to-business kind of provider. That's all right, because the owner is low and moderate income. That's how you've met the national objective. Then, for any businesses that don't qualify under limited clientele because the owner is not low and moderate income, then you go back and find one of the other national objective criteria that particular business can meet. That is a very quick recap, I realize. You may well have more questions. We hope to provide more information specifically on these. Now I'm going to turn over the proceedings to Hugh Allen, who's going to talk about the Section 108 Loan Guarantee Program. And as we trade places here at the telephone, this is, let me remind you, this is a chance for you to take a second and type in whatever questions you have.
Thank you, Steve. Good to be with you this afternoon. Hope you are continuing to learn something from this. I wonder, before I start presenting, though, if, on the count of 3, if everyone would just stand up beside their chair, lift their 2 arms above their head, and do 3 claps, and then sit back down. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Stand up, lift your hands above your head, clap, and sit down. Okay, for those of you who participated in that little exercise, thank you for the standing ovation. For those of you who did not participate in that exercise, stay alive for this presentation. Okay, here we go. Section 108. I seem to be hung on one slide here, microenterprise.
Use the mouse.
Oh, use the mouse. All right. Very good. The mouse always works. Okay, I'm going to do a little recap in a short period of time here about the Section 108. Then I'm going to give you some examples that hopefully will give you some benefits in making use of this fund. The first thing to focus on is that Section 108 financing is a part of the CDBG program. So all the things that Diane and Steve Roadside and James Heyman have spoke about, and Steve Johnson, that's helpful to you because you will use it in the Section 108 program. But here's the key thing. We're talking about debt now. We're talking about financing. We aren't talking about grants. So there's going to be some variation here. The second thing for you to remember is this. In this challenging time in many of our localities across the country, you can use your block grant funds that you receive to leverage 5 times that amount. So you can expand your community development block grant program. And again, this is what we need in local areas and in states. You need to have additional resources. Also, just be aware that you've got to meet the CDBG program requirements, as well as we have to do underwriting of the Section 108 loan guarantee that we would be issuing. And as we indicated back in March 16th, states can now apply directly to assist their local governments. And obviously, entitlement communities can apply. And just so you're aware, so where do you get the money to pay it back? You could choose to pay it back with block grant funds. Program income, that's a word that covers a lot of possibilities. The main thing that we note in there is generally it's third party. So if you get this financing, you can relend it, and a third party can pay it back. So there are other revenues. And the final point is not only a little screen here, but I want you to be aware of this. If you want to use the Section 108 loan guarantee financing, you do have to make an application, submit it to the local field office. They'll do a program compliance analysis, and they'll send it into headquarters. We'll do a due diligence on the program compliance, and also do an underwriting, and then see whether or not it's an adequate, whether or not it meets the risk criteria that we have for issuing a loan guarantee. So keep that in mind. Now let's move to a second slide here. Just quickly, I want to make a mention of this. We used this last time. I'm just going to make a note of it because given the scarcity of time here, I'm not going to go into detail on this. But one of the things that we're developing guidance for coming out to you in the not-too-distant future is on using mixed use. We see more of that across the country being used. The zoning conditions in communities have changed. This is a smart way to use money. And in this example, if you can see the screen there and the slide that's showing the building with the dark front, that's housing. That's the Oxford Plaza, so you got 97 affordable housing units in there, and you got 8,100 of commercial in there. And then the rounded front building there is pretty much commercial. There's some interesting pieces of information and policy issues that we are going to be addressing in the guidance coming out, so stay tuned for that. All right. Here, just quickly summarize a couple things to keep in mind as we go forward. Again, the amount that you can borrow under the Section 108 program is 5 times the annual CDBG award that you're getting. So, what does that mean? For every $1 in CDBG funds, you can leverage $5 in Section 108 loan guaranteed financing. Again, the word financing is key. I'm not talking about grant funds, I'm talking about financing. And then who can apply for it? Who's an eligible applicant? Entitlements can, obviously. States can, and local governments can through the support of their state. Also, you should know you can get this money on loan, or the proceeds can be made available to you for up to 20 years. That's helpful. So what are the types of Section 108 financing? This is important as we go forward. Just quickly, and I'll explain this again. We had some questions about it off of the last broadcast we did. There's an interim financing facility we have, and there's a permanent credit facility we have. In the interim, you'll get variable interest rate financing. In the permanent financing facility, you'll get fixed rate financing. So let me show you a diagram. You saw it last time, but I want to make sure you see it one more time. This is an attempt to draw I'm not sure what this was, maybe a parallelogram, but whatever. If you look at to the triangle to the right, that's the interim, way the interim facility works. If you look to the triangle to the left, that's the way the permanent facility works. Here are the two key players. HUD is up the top at the left, and the locality of the states at the bottom to the right. So what happens? If you submit a successful Section 108 application, and by the way, they're not competitive, these are conforming reviews, we try to assist you to be in compliance, but you get the money if you can meet the requirements and the underwriting requirements. So you'll end up pledging your community development block grants as one source of repayment. You'll also have to pledge some additional security depending on the deal. But here's the key thing. Look at both the triangle to the right and the triangle to the left. So when HUD approves it, going forward, you'll issue the note. We'll provide you with the documents to execute that you won't have to come up with your own note. We've got that in place. But HUD will place on top of your note a guarantee. Who does the guarantee go to? Does it go to you? Heck no. It goes to the investors that are going to buy your note from the capital market. They give you the loan proceeds. So just very quickly, look at the top diagram again, the triangle to the up at the top part, and you can see that once the guarantee is placed on the note, then we have an investor that will buy your note, and they make the loan proceeds directly to you, down in the bottom right. Same thing on the permanent facility. Once you get an approved 108 loan guarantee, we submit that and we put that into a public offering. Those are institutional investors that buy your note, and the proceeds come directly to you. We can go in more detail if you got questions, but I'm going to leave it at that. This is a good slide to remember. And what's the takeaway from this slide? The takeaway is you do not get your Section 108 loan financing through LOCS, the letter credit control system. You get it directly through investors making it available to you. And I'll show you how that works. Okay, let's look at the interim loan just very quickly. If you get an interim loan, what does that mean? Well, it means you got a loan from an interim facility. If you look down at the bottom of the slide, we actually sell your note into a money market fund. It's federated investors out in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, if you need to know. And we have the Bank of New York in New York that is our fiscal agent on this. So they'll service the loan at the federal level, and they'll make sure your proceeds get to you. Here's the important thing to know about the short-term interim rate facility. You're going to be borrowing money, and the interest rate is going to be based on the London Interbank Offering Rate, commonly referred to as LIBOR, plus 20 basis points. I'll show you what these rates, where they are today. This is very inexpensive money. But let me go forward. And then HUD guarantees, where does the guarantee go again? It goes to the lender, or the investor, if you will, who's giving you the money, to tell them that you buy this note, you'll get a timely repayment of your principal and interest. You can bet on it. Uncle Sam will be there, as he is for every other thing that is operating in our society today, pretty much. Okay, permanent 108 loans, this is just where you get fixed interest rate financing. What you need to know about that is the long-term financing is what you'll need, and if you initially get your money out of the interim financing after your project is completed, then we'll move you into the permanent facility. So we have a public offering. We actually have investment bankers working with us to help put this together. And the interest rates, I'm moving quickly down the slides here, the interest rates are fixed, and they're based on U.S. Treasury notes, U.S. Treasury note yields. So we look at the 2-year Treasury note, we look at the 5-year Treasury note, we look at the 10-year Treasury note, and your rates, the interest rates that you'll be paying are based on those, pretty much. There will be some fees in here related to underwriting, legal, and printing costs. It only comes out to 1/2 of 1%. So it's a very inexpensive way to get financing. And instead of a physical agent handling the money and the repayments and so forth, we set up a trustee, which is also the Bank of New York. Okay. Now, here are the interest rates just quickly, and then we'll move into some examples. The prime rate. We don't operate with the prime rate, but you know what the prime rate is. The prime rate is what your major banks are lending to their prime solid customers. It's about 3.25. If you get a Section 108 loan guarantee, your fixed rate will come in. If we did the public offering here in March, it'd be about 3.85. Still very, very inexpensive money. We encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity. We don't know where interest rates will go, neither do you, but that's not the point. The rates are low. One final thing is, if you get your money initially through the interim financing, that 0.31% doesn't mean the interest rate is 31%. It means it's less than 1%. It's only 1/3 of 1%, plus 20 basis points. So you're talking about 51 basis points are less than 1%. You can't beat it. Money's almost being given away to you. Keep that in mind. You need to use this program and facilitate your benefits to your low and moderate income populations and businesses locally. Okay, I'm going to switch. I'm speeding. I'm hoping it's not going in too fast to you. Those of you who are still alive, here we're going to look at some examples quickly. I'm going to go over some points in the regulation. I'm not going to bore you with a lot of quotes on the citation report, but that will facilitate you doing economic development. The program's been around for 30 years. I know you're aware of it, but we're going to encourage you to use it and focus on this when you're doing economic development. The first one is presume low and moderate income benefit. What do we mean by presume? We use that word and we toss it around. Basically, it means you don't have to show proof of meeting the requirements here. It's presumed that you're meeting the requirements. So if you've got a business and here's the key. If I can get this mouse to roll with me here. Here's the key. Look at the bottom of this slide. If you've got a business that's located in an enterprise community or an empowerment zone, actually those are old programs. I don't even know if many of them are still around, but if they are, good for you. But here's the key thing. If your business is in a census tract that's got a poverty rate of 20%, or if it's in a central business district, that's what CBD stands for, then you got to have 30% poverty, and you got to demonstrate that the poverty is pervasive. You get the presumed benefits. You don't have to show proof. What does that mean to you? It means you can reduce your burden of keeping records. Come on, who doesn't want that in this today's world? But one other thing, look right above. Well, so the business is not in a low-income area or a qualified census tract. How about the employees? Well, if you can figure out the employee lives, I'm going to go to the bottom one. You can look at the top two and you get, but here's the key thing. If you're in a census tract with 20% poverty, or again 30% poverty if it's in a central business district, and meet some of the other criteria, you're presumed that they're low moderate. And guess what? You don't have to keep records on that. Let's face it, folks, this is an incentive you want to take advantage of. All right? So keep that in mind. And when you're doing your planning under consolidated plan, don't you have to do community development needs and housing needs? Okay. Sure you do. So do your planning looking for census tracts that work for you. But here's a little entity that's not that widely used, but it's got more flexibility that's available to you and helps you out a lot. It's called the Community Economic Development Project. Why am I focusing just on that? Because there are actually three types. There's a neighborhood revitalization, there's an energy type project. But if you're going to use Section 108, you can only do a Community Economic Development Project. I've given you a reg citation down here off to the right side. You can look at that at your leisure time. But here's the whole point of it. We're using Section 108 financing, and you look into this regulation. I'll say it real quick. It's 57204A. It's about carrying out a program with a community-based development organization. Don't let that put you off, because here's the deal. You can also do it with a community development organization or with a community housing development organization that would qualify as a community development organization. I hope I haven't said it too much to confuse you there, but you've got a lot of flexibility under here. You should use this. This needs to be in everybody's plan, that you're going to carry out a community economic development program with your funding. Why? Here's the big advantage. You can address the lack of affordable housing accessible to existing and planned jobs. We're looking at a deal right now in our shop. I can't tell you where it is yet because we haven't made a decision on it, but it's a mixed-use building. You got 193 units of affordable housing sitting on top of a commercial structure. It's a mixed-use building, and they're carrying it out as a community economic development project. So big deal. What's the other advantage there? Did you know under this provision of the regulation you can do new construction housing? Huh? You didn't know that? Look it up. You'll find it. All right. Let me move on here to the last slide I think I'm going to show you is the neighborhood revitalization strategy area for entitlements and, catch this acronym now, the Community Revitalization Strategy Area. So why two different acronyms? NRSAs are for entitlements and CRSAs are for states. You need to be using this. You need to be targeting your fund. I don't want to preach to you. You can do what you want to with the money. But I'm telling you, you're going to get benefits out of this if you can use this money this way. In an NRSA and CRSA, I know what you're doing. You're chuckling out there. You're saying, hey, show me a CRSA that's been done throughout the country. I'll tell you one right now. It's in Winooski, Vermont, right across the river from Burlington, Vermont. They put $24 million into a CRSA. They had housing there. They had economic development. So what's the big advantage here? Well, here's a big advantage. Again, you get to reduce your record-keeping burden for this, although you've got to meet public benefit. Furthermore, you can, here's another thing, we didn't put in the slide here, but if you're doing economic development, guess what? You can report it as meeting the national objective under area benefit. Again, you don't have to keep the records if you do it in the NRSA and you got an area benefit. And if you combine it with some housing, guess what? You can aggregate the housing as if it were one structure. What's the example I could give you? Okay, you build in an NRSA or CRSA, you you rehab a housing property that's going to have 51 units, a market of low and moderate income housing in it. And then there's another building that's going to be rehabbed. It's going to be 50 units of market rate housing. Well, if you're in an NRSA, you don't have to look at those housing buildings as separate and meeting a separate national objective. You can combine it as if it were one, and voila, you've got 51% of the units that meet a national objective. Take a look at this. You'll have to submit your strategy to HUD to be approved. Again, it's not competitive. It will serve you. You need that flexibility going forward. And states, you can now apply for 108. Let's get on the ball and come in here for some community revitalization strategy areas. You can carry them out in your local community like they did in Winooski. All right, folks, I think that we are at the end of this presentation on Section 108. I'm sorry I sped through it, but I'm going to take you now to the last slide for one more piece of information. You notice that here we're planning more training sessions and we got a webinar. Well, what are we going to be focusing on? Well, the webinar is going to be on the Economic Development Toolkit. Very useful training, and that toolkit's going to be made available to you on that. Then we're also going to have some sessions on some Section 108 sessions for grantees and economic development, and I think we'll do some more on CDBG. And when is it coming? It's going to start It's going to start next month. We've only got 2 days this month. Sometime next month, you'll get a notification about this, and you can come and do it. Final thing is, don't forget, in the beginning of the presentation, you saw the guide to national objectives and eligible activities for entitlements and for states. Be sure and use those. Those are good resources. Two more. Obviously, you've got your statute and your code. Surely you know this by heart by now. The program's only 30-some years old. And the Economic Development Tool. Here's where you can go get a copy of it by clicking on that. I'm going to stop. We'll take questions. Diane, if you need to pick it up, come pick it up. Thanks for staying alive during the presentation. Good luck.
Hi, this is Steve Roadside. You can recognize it's not Diane. And what we're going to try to do is answer some questions that we got during the broadcast. One that I would like to answer is I understand that CDBG national objectives, but I'm bothered by the discussion of low and moderate income jobs because it seems to encourage low-wage jobs. Is there a way to meet low and moderate income requirements while ensuring workers receive a fair, livable wage? What the requirement is not that the jobs pay a low and moderate income salary, but the people are members of the low and moderate income family at the time they're hired. It would be wonderful if we had people that were from low and moderate income families that got hired into jobs that paid $35, $40 an hour. That's what we're aiming at. As Michael Dukakis used to say, good jobs with good wages. I'll turn it over to Steve Johnson for another question.
Thank you, Steve. We got a couple questions specifically to the entitlement program. One is, it asks, do the drug-free workplace requirements apply to economic development loans to for-profit businesses? I think what you're referring to is that you as a grantee have to certify in your action plan and your consolidated plan that you have a drug-free workplace policy in effect for you as the local government or as the state. That requirement does not apply farther down the line. That only applies to you as a grantee. So there is no requirement that you enforce that on your own, on the businesses that you choose to assist. If you wish to do so, there's certainly nothing that stops you from doing that. I'm also going to note a question that we got during our first webinar at the beginning of the month, which has sort of a curious interaction with this particular question, if you'll indulge me. We actually had somebody ask about, could you provide assistance to a medical marijuana dispensary? Well, overlooking the fact that they probably couldn't sign a drug-free workplace certification for you, one thing I think is worth noting here, as I said, we don't have any particular prohibitions on certain kinds of businesses that you can't assist. However, that case, it presents a curious duality. They may be legal in your state. However, my understanding is distribution of marijuana is considered a controlled substance and is still illegal under federal law. So I would suggest, while you might be okay under your own state law, that might be viewed as breaking federal law. So I would be very cautious, and I would check with your lawyers on that question. A second question we had about what about a group or an organization that does party planning or promotes parties in low and moderate income areas? Well, I can think of two ways to interpret that question. One might be that you want to provide assistance to a business, or maybe a startup business, that's their job, is they do party planning and promotions. Well, that's okay. I guess I don't see that as necessarily of question. You know, what's their service area? On the other hand, I guess one way to question is, are they specifically wanting to organize parties on behalf of neighborhood groups? You know, that might be a slightly different kind of party planning, and that may not be something that you could say is a business. I hope that answered that question. Certainly, low and moderate income neighborhood residents should have every bit as much opportunity for entertainment and fun as anyone else. So I would not necessarily question a business that is in the party planning or party organizing business. I think we have some more questions that Steve Roadside will take on.
Yeah, I'm going to do one, then I'll turn it over. We had a question: do low and moderate income persons have to reside in the city limits of the grantee providing CDBG assistance? What if the low and moderate income person is from a neighborhood community? Does this person, the non-resident, count towards the job retention calculation? The answer is that we're counting the employees of the business, not where they live. So that it doesn't matter where the people reside, just as long as they're working with the business, for the business. Next.
Okay, 2-108 questions that we're going to pick up here. We're going to try to share these questions. We aren't going to be able to answer all of them, but someone's asked if the maximum term for Section 108 is 20 years, and the answer is yes. Here's another question regarding underwriting criteria for 108. Basically, it reads something along this line: the borrower is owner of a building, and funds will be used for improvements which will allow the existing tenant the ability to expand, create jobs. Okay, that appears on the surface to be okay. The tenant business has completed and signed a new job estimate certification, and this form then becomes an exhibit to the loan agreement that the borrower execute. First thing I would say is HUD doesn't require a new job estimate certification, and then the question is, well, does HUD require the tenant to enter into any of the agreements? No, but here's the real thrust behind this question is, if the community that's using the Section 108 financing is going to make it available to a third-party business owner so that they can do tenant improvements, then that community, that borrower, the first-line borrower, it needs to demonstrate that they can carry out compliance under this. So if you don't have any kind of agreement with the business or with the tenant that they've got to meet certain criteria, either for hiring low-mod jobs or whatever, then you're going to be caught short of being able to enforce the uses of that money. But if you got more questions, send them in.
This is Steve Johnson again, and I think this is going to be our last question. It's actually slightly past 3:30. We said we would go till 3:30, and we may get cut off here at some point anyway. We had sort of a multi-part question that came in regarding commercial rehabilitation. Can we provide forgivable loans to businesses that receive commercial rehab assistance? If what you mean is, can the rehab assistance be in the form of a forgivable loan? Yes. If that's what you want to do, you can. If the question is, if a business is located in a building that receives commercial rehab assistance, can that business also receive direct assistance as assistance to a for-profit business? The answer, again, is yes. If that's what you want to do, that is certainly allowable under our regulations. That assistance to the business is going to be categorized as a different economic development activity. It's going to be under 570.203, Special Economic Development Assistance to a for-profit business, and so you essentially have two different activities to track. They could meet two different national objectives, and that could be perfectly fine. Some other questions had to do with, are there limits on the amount of assistance that can be provided on commercial rehabilitation? Not under our regulations. There's no limitations. It is your decision how much you want to provide per building or per business. People asked, do you have to guarantee that the business stays in operation for a certain amount of time, or that the jobs stay in existence for a certain amount of time? Our regulations are silent on that matter. That is your decision to make. If you wish to put something like that in your requirements to provide good stewardship and to make sure that the business is going to stick around, that is your decision. One last question seems to be, how many jobs would have to be created if you provide a commercial rehabilitation loan of a certain dollar amount? There is no requirement. Even if you are treating that as a low and moderate income job creation activity for national objective purposes, the public benefit standards do not apply if you're funding this as commercial rehabilitation. So there is no set number. If you wish to establish some criteria as part of your local program design, you are entirely within your rights to do so. We're going to conclude now. We were unfortunately not able to get to every single one of the questions that came in during our webinar today. On behalf of all of our trainers here this afternoon, Hugh Allen, Diane Lavasso, James Heyman, and Steve Roadside, and myself, I'd like to thank you all for your attention, for your interest in economic development. We also want to thank you for everything you do on a day-to-day basis to carry out your programs well, to be good stewards of the federal money, and to carry out the needs of your communities. We really appreciate that. We know you work very hard, and we expect to be providing you additional economic development guidance and assistance henceforth. Thank you for your attention. Have a good day.
That concludes today's conference. Thank you for your participation.